What I'm more concerned about is what Stuart has painted around Washington and what this says about Washington. And I think it says a lot about the rule of law. Washington is clearly standing in a very presidential pose with his hand reaching out, his other hand again on a sword. So we're going to come back to that in a minute, especially thinking about some of the things Tim mentioned just a few minutes ago. But when we go ahead and click, and let's go to a close-up. Well, there it is again without the title. Go ahead and click one more time. When we look at the background, though, we do see some storm clouds that are starting to break apart. And we see the beginnings of a rainbow and a very prominent rainbow pictured up here in this particular portion of the window of the painting up above Washington. And so we have what could very well be two allusions to the Great Deluge. The storm clouds, they are now dissipating, and there is hope. A rainbow has appeared. And if we just had storm clouds, that's a traditional symbol for political, social unrest, turmoil. But the addition of the rainbow really makes us start to think of this in a more biblical sense. And if we have a storm, and if we have a rainbow, then what else do you need in that equation? Somebody said it. An ark? Yeah, an ark, right? So would there be an ark in this painting? Well, go ahead and click. I would argue there possibly is. And it's painted right here, as we're going to see in a second. But one thing, yeah, well, there it is. Yeah, we'll go ahead and skip the quote. Good, yeah. He did make reference to storms and such in a letter to James Madison in 1786 in reference to Shays's rebellion in Massachusetts. He wrote, "No morn ever dawned more favorably than ours did, and no day was ever more clouded than present." And whether Stuart was playing off of that quote or not, we don't know. But nonetheless, there is possibly what I would argue to be an ark. It's the inkwell that is on the table. Go ahead and click. When we look at what the Smithsonian Portrait Gallery says of this inkwell, they write, quote, "The inkwell and quill may refer to the making of laws and the fact that Washington wrote and signed many important documents in his lifetime. The two documents on the table could be Stuart's way of symbolizing Washington's role in the important documents, but Stuart does not portray any specific document such as the recently signed Jay's Treaty." So it's sort of vague as to what papers are on the table, but they admit that possibly that this particular inkwell has some sort of relationship with law. It also goes on to note, the Smithsonian notes, that although Washington owned a great quantity of silver, which he took care to order with his full arms or the crest, which is, and I don't know if you can see it outlined, but that's Washington's crest on the inkwell. The inkwell in the painting may not be a real object. Stuart generally did not use what we would call props. The inkwell, fashioned in the neoclassical boat design inspired by Roman antiquity, apparently came from his imagination. Emphasis mine. A quill pen rests in a hole in the roof of the inkwell's cabin. Also on the table is Washington's black hat, of which there were contemporary descriptions. Go ahead and click. I think this is fairly accurate. When we look at depictions from the ancient period of boats, you can see there's a similar design. They have sort of this banana type look to them. This corbita, which was sort of after a bread basket. And you can see that design. Go ahead and click. But the problem is that none of those depictions include a cabin. And so as we go ahead and look at other images from the period, we also see that when artists from the ancient period, well, the 12th century in this case, the 1100s, depict Noah's Ark, they add that cabin as a distinctive feature. Go ahead and click, and then we see a more closer to the period we're looking at, 16th century depiction of Noah's Ark. And when I would say that if we compare them and look at their comparisons, we see that it's pretty similar, isn't it? Can you see that there's some similarities there between the way in which artists have traditionally depicted Noah's Ark in Western art and then this particular inkwell? So in that sense, I would argue that, no, I don't think this is totally from his imagination. I think it was influenced by other depictions of Noah's Ark. And if we have a storm and if we have a rainbow, we could very easily also have an ark. Go ahead and click. And so as such, when we look at the compositional elements, click, we have... when we start with the rainbow and extend down along his arm, it kind of brings the viewer's eyes along this trajectory where we're seeing these three references to the Great Deluge. And if the ark is representing laws, I think we could make an argument that what has been the force that has allowed Washington to weather the storms that the nation has faced, but the rule of law. I would argue that this biblical reference is aligned with some of his thought in regard to the rule of law, but ultimately what we need to remember, I would argue, from this painting is the rule of law and the respect for the law is what will help us as a nation weather the storms and be able to survive